Well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 56th episode of Retuning Your Firm. The themes today, there are three, really. We're looking at EdTech, in other words, how technology can actually help with learning. We're then looking at the online learning world in general. And then we're touching on a topic which some of you may have noticed if I'm allowed to do this without cover, The Economist. Broad bandits, the surging cyber threat from spies and crooks. So topical subject, and let me just tell you who we've got on the show today to cover those points. Firstly, staying with the cyber for a minute, we have Chris Gaines, and Chris is the lead cyber security partner at PwC, and he's going to be talking to us about cyber threats in 5 minutes, which I think probably he would say 5 hours is probably far too short, but I'm looking forward to his thoughts on that. Our second guest for today is Dil Sidhu. I think about 18 months ago, people suddenly woke up to online learning. It's actually been around quite a long time. And Dil's been involved in that industry, and it is an industry often known as massive open online courses, or MOOCs. And if you may recall, back in May, Helen Brand of ACCA spoke a bit about it. So I thought it'd be really interesting to invite edX, who are one of the major players, not the major player, to come and talk about online learning and EdTech. And thanks again to Helen for making the introduction. That was really appreciated. Our third, I won't say guest because she's like my companion, my regular, is Francesca Lagerberg, who, as you probably know, is the global leader of network capabilities, did an amazing job at the summit a couple of days ago, moderating the panel sessions on people and on leadership, and had a real sort of interesting, little bit of tension there. It was great between the two of the people, one of whom was convinced that leadership can be taught, and the other of whom was convinced that leadership is an innate skill which can be enhanced, but if you haven't got it, you haven't got it. And of course, yours truly, Richard Chaplin, the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum. So before we go into the poll, let's just do a quick forum catch up, just so at least we can bring you up to speed. Firstly, the summit. The summit took place on Tuesday, and all the feedback I've had so far suggests that it went really, really well. The good news is, if you missed it, and I think some of you may have done, there are videos available, and they're now all up on YouTube. And you don't have to go to YouTube, just go to the usual Retuning Your Firm page. In the keywords, select Summit 2021, and guess what? All the 6 sessions, each of about 20 minutes, will come up, and then with pictures of who were in them. And they're really interesting, because if there's anything that we've done that's really encapsulated the whole set of themes that we've been working on throughout the past year, that I think was it. Tuesday roundtables, strategy is really popular. It's interesting. The last one we did was for the HR group, and I think I had more finance people on the HR roundtable than HR people, which shows that it's definitely a big issue. But the finance people are saying we're not actually that involved in strategy, which I thought was a bit strange as well. So traditionally they seem to own it. So there's lots of things moving there. So that's interesting. We're running up to about 500 people a week watching the videos from past shows. So do join in. They're all there. They're free, public good. And our whole focus as the forum is to share knowledge. So this is a wonderful platform for that. A little bit of renewal information, peer groups, 100% renewal. And we're starting a couple of new groups in the autumn. So again, hopefully that might be of interest. And Claire, my colleague, will be in touch with those people who have shown interest to date. And then lastly, this show, we're going to be running it weekly until the 9th of July. That's 2 more episodes after today. And then I'm going to take a break. I think after 18 months, I need one, and come back on the 17th of September. And then we're going to be running it in a slightly more leisurely way. We'll begin running it as fortnightly during the next period. So what are we going to do next? Well, one of the things that I think is really important is to recognize that the polls that you do aren't just noticed by us and our community. We've had this feedback from government and other people as well. So really do them, because, and it's very obvious in a way, but the middle market is very difficult for anyone to poll, because big firms, and we've still got PwC on today, always very happy to have a conversation with ministers, that's a given. And small firms through universities and hubs, etc. It's not too hard to find out from where that section's at. But the mid-market are very busy. You're all running your own businesses. You might get involved in a regulatory issue, but anything to do with what you think about something to do with the sort of issues that we cover around management and leadership isn't something that would normally answer the poll. So we really appreciate your contribution. So let's look at what did you say last week when we ran the poll? Well, if you recall, what we were looking at was the usage of new technologies. And if you haven't looked at the infographic, it's up on the website. So do check it out. And it's also in the link we sent you for the invitation for today. So that's what we were looking at. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at it in the terms of different management practices. All we hear about is clients and how we're going to change the pattern with clients. And that's fair, and it's probably true. But what we actually found was that it was kind of the ranking, really. We asked about 7 different areas. So the one that was the highest usage of new tech was financial management. Not quite the same as fintech, but I guess there's some analogies there. Then, as you probably expect, the client service side. Then we went into marketing and new business generation. 5th on the list, or 4th on the list, can't do my counting, was influencing innovation. Then we went into knowledge management. Next, people management. And you may recall when Vinyani was on the call on the show last week, she was talking about HR tech and how people management is actually using AI, even if it's unaware of it. And then finally, and to me, this is a bit sad because at the end of the day, strategy to me really matters, strategy development. So so that was the kind of the thinking we had here. And what we did find, and this won't surprise you, is there were significant variances between firms. Some of them had new technologies not on the radar, and some of them, they were firmly in place. It was there was very broad spread. And that won't again surprise you. So I'll just show you a couple of charts, and if you can't see them in sufficient detail, forgive. But the key message really was we were looking at employee engagement and particularly the employee experience that your firm provides its people. And the 2 areas that came out really strongly at the top, both into the sort of around about 70 or a bit more percentage, were firstly colleagues and the culture. And we're going to talk a lot about culture today, because at the end of the day, a lot of cyber is about colleagues and culture. And then secondly, the client base and the technical quality of the work. So they were the 2 things. And the second one, just another quick slide I'll show you, was the level of advocacy for internal and external audiences about the level of employee engagement around here. And the far right said, I would speak highly without being asked. And next to it is, I would speak highly if asked. Middle one is, I'd be neutral. We all know what that means in England. On the left, I would be critical if asked. And the last one, I would be critical without being asked, which is your typical saboteur. Luckily, no saboteurs in the audience, which is good to know. What I found quite interesting was if you look at the colors, the internal audience gets blue and the external audience gets red. So actually, people are more positively internally than they are externally by a small amount. Now, whether that's because they're worried that if they say something internally, their job is at stake, whereas they can go and chat to a client, I don't know. I wasn't expecting that result. So that was quite interesting in itself. So let's move on to today. What are we going to do today? Well, today's poll is about cybersecurity. And you may think, well, okay, I'm in a leadership role and I may have a cyber problem. But the questions I'm asking here, and I wanted to thank Chris for helping me with those questions, are ones that we really think a board, or I really think a board should actually be thinking about. So what are they? Let's run through them quickly. So we're talking here about non-trivial cyber attacks. There's an interesting stat that says, on average, every business in the UK gets an attack every 45 seconds. And if you haven't come across that stat, think about it. For every 45 seconds of every day, you are being attacked. Now, mostly your IT team are keeping most of them away. So let's look at the non-trivial ones. The level of investment in it. How much of your expenditure is actually going into that area? Is it viewed as a board issue, or is it something that is delegated to others in the organization? Which of the threats are you actively managing, as opposed to just including on some checklist? To what extent, everyone's talked about ransomware, to what extent are you actually planning for it? Do you have a proper disaster recovery plan in connection with a ransomware attack? Everybody talks about the KPIs, these are the CRIs. What are the cyber risk indicators that might trigger a concern internally if they're not present, if they're present? And then the last one, which I actually think really is quite interesting, which is rewards. If somebody is not a cyber expert, but does something that prevents a cyber attack, to what extent are they rewarded? And that, I'm talking about public rewards here. And equally, and possibly the hardest of all, if somebody, particularly in a senior role, does something that facilitates a cyber attack, and I'm not talking about deliberate, obviously it's inadvertently, what sort of sanctions apply? Or is it free for all and it doesn't really matter? Because believe me, if people don't see leadership, then they'll just follow the leadership that they observe. And we all know where that leads us sometimes. So that's the poll for today. Hopefully it's quite interesting. So let's end the poll and let's share the results. When it comes to frequency, how often does your firm receive a non-trivial, and I'm sure Chris can explain the difference between trivial and non-trivial. I thought of using the word material, but it's got too many connotations in the accountancy world. And the answer to that was 53% of you are unsure. And if you are a board and you've got an issue and you're unsure of the frequency of the problem, then that's not a good place to start. So that's all I'll say. I'm sure Chris will reinforce that. And in terms of, has that volume increased? Well, unsurprisingly, the 53%, if you're unsure now, you're probably unsure 3 years ago. For the others, there seems to be a mix. Some of them think it's more than tripled, and others think it's somewhere between up to doubled. But nobody, surprise, surprise, thinks it's reduced. That was only there because I just need to be complete for the survey purposes. Moving on, what are we looking at here now? The current level of investment. Well, it seems to be a bit of a range here. 53% again unsure. The stats I've seen suggest about 3%, but I'm sure Chris will expand on that. But that's in terms of your total expenditure, and obviously you need to include partners for notional salaries, because otherwise it's a fairly meaningless number. But some people, the one that's strongest, if excluding the unsures, is 1 to 2%. So that again is probably something that Chris will have a view on. In terms of where do people think that it will be in 3 years' time, it's gone up. It's now in the 2 to 3, nudging 3 to 4%. Again, 53% unsure. Okay, in terms of where is the board, and we gave a range here from one person said that it's not even seen as a board issue. Fair enough. Another one sort of said, yes, we are. Read this. I think the main view here would be that the one that comes through most, least unsure has dropped to 12%. That's something. Is the whole area of the board is kept informed on a regular basis. But what you're not seeing is this higher levels of, informing the strategy, integral part of innovation and growth. We are a digital business. That isn't coming through very strongly. Looking at cyber threats and which are the ones that are being actively managed, and the key word in that sentence was, of course, actively. And again, here, the unsures are less. So I think people are aware of what's going on. They're just not aware of the volume of a threat that's involved. Is that something that should be shared? I think it does influence behavior, personally. So let's look here. What's coming through? Malware, ransomware in particular, password attacks, phishing. It's all the usual suspects. Those are the 3 or 4 compromised third-party software. Those are the main ones which you read about a lot in the media. Nobody says none of the above, by the way, on that one. So all firms are doing something, which is great. We then looked a little bit more into ransomware, because that's kind of very, very topical at the moment. And 47% of you weren't sure what was going on. 12% said that they didn't. There was no what I would call effective ransomware attack recovery plan. It's a bit of a mouthful. And the ones that were probably there was just about the ability to restore the IT infrastructure, but nobody is more than half. So there's obviously some work there just to get that disaster recovery plan in place, because it could hit any of us. Next question was in terms of the CPI, or KPIs, in this case, the CRIs, the cyber risk indicators. I hate acronyms, but that one sounded quite good. To be honest, none of them are really getting very much here. A third of you saying that they have none of them, and a third are saying you're unsure. So there really isn't put it this way, there isn't enough clarity, I think, about what messages need to go to the front line for things to watch out for in order to report back to board or whoever. And that means the comms falls apart quite quickly. In terms of public rewards, for somebody who does way beyond the call of duty and foils an attack, 76% would never give that reward publicly. And that gives a message internally, I think, quite strongly. And the same, nearly 71%, if a director or a partner inadvertently facilitated. And I actually didn't use the word inadvertent. I just put facilitated, but you can read that any which you like. I think nobody's going to do it. That's fraud otherwise, effectively. But again, 71% are never going to be sanctioned for that behavior. And I think if those behavioral issues aren't in place, then, well, you're going to find it difficult to get people to look at it seriously, is my observation. Chris, I hope I haven't stolen too much of your thunder, but that's the poll result. So you now know a lot about your audience. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
So hi everyone, I'm Chris Gaines. I lead our cybersecurity practice for PwC in the UK. I guess we're a reasonably well kept secret, but we are recognised actually as the leading cyber consulting practice in the UK. We've over 300 people in the UK, and actually there's 4,000 cyber practitioners working for PwC across our network, which I guess itself speaks to the kind of rapidly growing demand for our services. I mean, I've personally worked in this field now for over 20 years, and it will be no surprise to hear that in each and every year the interest has grown, but we've never seen a year like this one. The shift to remote working has brought immediate risks and completely altered the threat landscape for most businesses, actually. And we are seeing cyber criminals take advantage of this massive shift with widespread targeting, actually, of all sectors and clients of all sizes. And we've talked about it a bit already, but the exponential rise in devastating ransomware attacks. So we spend an awful lot of our time in our business helping clients unpick the impact of a ransomware attack. In fact, the trend in our business this year in the incident response space has been towards supporting medium-sized enterprises, and actually professional services in particular have definitely been a target. And the question for our clients, the question we're posing our clients often now is kind of, what would you do tomorrow if hackers breached your defenses and lock you out completely of your own data and your own systems? So, I mean, I work in a professional services firm. Our people are our asset, but they all use IT to deliver their work. So we have to ask ourselves in PwC, if our people didn't have access to a laptop, didn't have access to our IT systems, how can we continue to practice? So I'd like to share 4 things, actually, I think you should know, and then 3 things for you to consider. The 4 things you should know, I mean, the first is, as we are in this session, ransomware hackers are researching your company and you. I mean, there's a huge payoff now, and the quality and the extent of the operations is staggering. They'll be looking at how well financed you are. They'll be looking at the partners and how well rewarded you are. They'll be thinking about how devastating a pause in operations would be, how impactful stealing the data would be. They will be looking at if you've got cyber insurance. So they'll be doing an awful lot of research on you and your organization. Ransomware is actually being sold as a service now. So this is a highly sophisticated ransomware is being leased out and put into the hands of a much broader audience for them to use. So part of the exponential rise is the fact that the people with the real skill to produce this malware are now leasing it out to a much larger group of people. And their business model is evolving, actually, and they're finding more ways to extract value, right through to doing things like shorting stocks on breaches only they know about. So, and kind of allied to all of that, the 4th thing is there's very little criminal sanction at the moment, so they can really act with impunity. So we really shouldn't expect this to go away. It's highly funded, it's very lucrative, the business model is evolving, and they're operating pretty much with impunity. So our view, and I think it should be your view, is this is here to stay for sure. So what to do about it? Just 3 things to think about. First, you should make your defense better than your peers. Ransomware criminals will choose the most lucrative and softest targets. So it's wise to harden your defenses and encourage hackers to look elsewhere. Plan now how to recover from an attack. If you're hit, having a plan can really cut your losses and get you back up and running quickly. In particular, and this is a really important point, having segregated full and incremental backups available to restore your business and reduce the operational impact. That's been the single biggest differentiator that we've seen in the incidents we've worked on. People who have full incremental backups are able to recover more quickly. And also develop an exercise today. Understand how you as a partnership would recover today. Think about investigating the extent, containing the breach, expelling an attacker from your environment. And finally, challenge yourself. The poll was really interesting, not unsurprising if I'm honest, but very interesting. Ask yourself if, as a board and as a partnership, if you've really engaged on the subject. Do you know how high your bar is? Do you know how high you want your bar to be, how much you want to spend, and how much it's going to cost in the event that the worst happens? If you haven't really got the answers to those questions, you haven't really engaged in the process, and you're not giving yourself the best opportunity to prevent an attack and recover from an attack, particularly the ransomware attacks. So that's hopefully just a quick canter through some useful context on the market, in particular ransomware and why it's so prevalent and why it's here to stay, and then 2 or 3 tips on how you might focus effort in your boardroom on managing the problem.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was superb focus on some very key issues. And one sad thought is that you probably are making this conversation to boards every day, probably multiple times a day. And let's hope that some of them listen, because the consequences are pretty dire, I suspect, if they don't. My second guest for today is Dil Sidhu. Welcome, Dil. And Dil's going to come and talk a bit about not just edX itself and MOOCs, but also about the whole world of online learning, because as I mentioned earlier, it isn't something that just appeared yesterday. It's something that's been around a number of years, and therefore something that firms can and should take advantage of existing knowledge rather than constantly reinventing the wheel. Over to you, sir.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm actually still thinking about what Chris had to say in terms of, you read the headlines, but it doesn't sink in terms of it's becoming a business in its own right. Anyways, EdTech. So technology is something that's being applied to a lot of things that we all do day in, day out. Technology has changed the way we listen to music, the way we watch TV. It's changed the way we shop. It's changed the way we travel or used to travel. It's changed the way we bank, and it's changed the way we look after ourselves in terms of healthcare and Fitbits and other things like that. And it's changing the way that we learn, whether you are a learner who is a student, either at college or a university, whether you're a professional who needs to do annual compliance update training, or whether you're a professional learner who is realizing that you are working in finance and people are talking about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and you want to learn more about what that world is all about. If you think about learning has evolved, albeit slowly compared to other industries. There are 5 stages that learning's gone through. It started out with somebody standing at the front of a room and writing things on a blackboard. From there, it moved on to printing press and books, so you could learn on your own and take the book with you. Then somebody came along with the idea that we've got huge classrooms at university, and let's put things on overhead so 600 people can see it rather than just the front row. And then we came into things like PowerPoint and personal computers, where you can share slides and information in advance. And now it's moved online. And online learning, what that does for especially universities who provide most of the content, it increases their reach. So you can have a university like University of London, and they're not new to the world of online learning. I mean, they more or less invented distance learning back in 1858 by sending out course materials by post, and you work on something and you send it back to London and somebody marks it, and albeit it was a slow process. In today's world, there is a number of what's called EdTech platforms, and they're platforms because they host content from universities and from industry partners. So this is content coming from people like Google, who have professional certificates that you can take over the course of 6 months. And there's some level of assessment in there, and that'll give you a qualification. So that's Google IT. Microsoft teaches things around databases through their Azure. Rolls-Royce Engineering teaches about the Internet of Things. Amazon Web Services teaches about cloud computing. And many of these courses are also being used to provide credit for a university program as well. However, for the world of business, online learning is seeing huge growth in business operators, both large, small, medium enterprises as well, who realize that whether it's moving to a digital world or whether it's improving communications or how people work from home, that learning and development online provides a cost-effective approach rather than sending people to a campus or to a training company or having that company come in to teach your people about something. And this is why companies like Coursera and edX and FutureLearn are now valued. Coursera just went public in March through an IPO and is valued at $5 billion US dollars, albeit they've not made a profit and don't expect to make a profit for the next 5 years. And that's because people are betting on the fact that online learning and access to education is going to be something that a lot of people around the world and a lot of organizations around the world want to use to reskill their people. Lots of new exciting things happening with the EdTech world. For instance, edX has 44 million registered learners. Now, the interesting thing about that is they're taking over 3,000 different courses, and they're also taking master's degrees. For instance, we have an MBA that's available from Boston University, and once you complete that, nowhere on that MBA will it say online or edX, it'll just say Boston University, because the admission standards, the tests and the exams that you take are absolutely the same grade. But what online does provide you is lots of data and analytics. So you can look at which teachers are having an effect, which students are learning faster, which videos are working. And that's a huge part of why a university wants to go online, is it provides them with lots of information that they can then use to improve the curriculum, whether that's for a student or the professional learner. I think that's probably about 5 minutes. So happy to take any questions once we get to it. But it's a growth area, and all you need to do is just type in online learning and find a provider that suits your business needs.
Thanks, Dil. And now we'll turn to Francesca. Good morning, Francesca. Welcome to the show. And
morning, Richard.
We've had two very different presenters today. We've had Dil obviously talking about this massive world of online learning, which, 44 million people registered, thousands of courses, MBA online, etc. And I think a lot of people just weren't aware of that whole industry. And then Chris, who's kind of made us realize that if we don't get our act together in a couple of areas, then we may not be able to continue even in business. So over to you, Francesca.
Sure. No, really interesting to hear both of those. One piece around how tech is a problem or can be a problem, and one piece how you can use it to good effect. And it's a whole brave new world for professional service firms, isn't it? It's how that you manage that technology, input, an opportunity and threat. It all comes as a package. I'll start with a bit of cyber now, and I'd love to hear the questions from Chris around just how people can get themselves going, because that survey was pretty frightening. I looked there at the number of people who just don't know how much they're spending on cyber, and also about whether they feel comfortable they've got the right cyber approach. Most of the global accounting networks are being attacked several thousand times a day by a whole range of different automated devices in the hope that they'll find a way through. And that is going to get more prevalent rather than less. And a large and sophisticated firms and large and sophisticated offices within groups of firms are the prize, because they're likely to have more access to more interesting data. So it's not a problem for the very, very small alone. It's the problem for everybody. I was blown away by this news stories around the Colonial Pipeline in the US. Many of you will know last week Asia went down. In many parts of Asia were attacked by a range of different cyber things that were going on. So it's very much a brave new world. And how do we get ourselves ready? How do we think about it? What can we put in place? And then, of course, what can we do to make sure that we've got a very clear understanding of how we manage our client data, how we protect ourselves. Do we pay ransoms? Do we not? What's the ethical piece behind that? Do you have a choice? When do you notify? How do you notify the regulators if that's appropriate in the jurisdiction you're in? There's just so many questions, so lots there, I think. And of course, for those organisations that are looking to do cyber as a service, never has a client needed it more, I suspect, than now. And that takes you to how you can use tech to really drive your future business. Because I'm in edX, and there's some fantastic online services just offer such an amazing way to access information. Gone are the days of the rather dreary talking head sitting at the screen with some very dodgy PowerPoint slides behind them. They're sophisticated, engaging. And I also think it'd be wonderful to hear a bit more about how can people encourage their employees to really use those opportunities. I know some people encourage people to do it in their own time or in time in the office, but they'll pay for the certification so that there's proof that they've done that. And it'd just be good to hear your tips on how people can really engage with that. So that's all for now, Richard. Happy to be part of the panel.
Fine. Chris, just perhaps picking up one I mentioned before, and is this whole issue of, if you are a mid-sized firm or maybe a smaller firm, and you may think, oh, it's fine because we're not going to be that vulnerable because we're not that interesting. How true is that, do you think?
No, I think less and less so, Richard. An awful lot of our work this year, there's been some really interesting characteristics that seem to have come through in the work that we've done this year. An awful lot of our ransomware clients have been mid-tier organizations in no particular sector. There's been some really interesting characteristics, like, quite a few of them have been in equity buyback moments in their journey. So I think what we're observing more and more is the quality of reconnaissance that the ransomware attackers are actually putting into their targets. So they're looking for people who are potentially at a moment in their time where, paying a ransom is going to be an imperative. And we also, I've mentioned a few times, we've worked for some big professional services firms and some small professional services firms, because, where your people are your biggest asset and they're using technology to deliver their services, stopping access to that technology really prevents that entire business from operating. So I guess the answer to your question is, the attacks now are kind of sector agnostic, and increasingly they've become size agnostic as well. They're looking for characteristics in your business that mean that you're likely to pay and that you're likely to be able to pay. So they're more important characteristics now than necessarily kind of your size or your sector.
Fantastic. Perhaps turning now to Dil, and it's a question that Francesca was posing, but in a way, I suspect a lot of people believe that when you get to a certain age, your brain can't learn new things. I think that myth has been exploded. But how do you actually help the more junior people, the ones who are looking to further their career, not necessarily in the technical space, that may be part of their training, but in other areas that will help them become a better manager and leader? What are the sort of key elements that edX and obviously others bring together to help people who aspire into management and leadership roles as opposed to more technical roles?
Sure, that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's two sayings that we live and breathe by, and I've worked with Coursera and currently with edX, and it's the same. One is knowledge is power, in terms of having knowledge that others don't have can help with your aspirations, and the other piece is really around lifelong learning. We're constantly learning, whether we want to or not. Every time I get a new phone, for instance, I need to learn how this one works now, and there seems to be one coming out every other week. I think what a lot of organizations have done, certainly during the downturn, and we've seen a 3,000% increase in the number of people who have registered onto the platform. And some people just want to learn because they want to learn about the Italian Renaissance. They're just interested. Others want to learn because they aspire to understand what is all this data analytics about as a new potential career. And then there's some people who want to learn in terms of how do I cope with working from home. So some of the recommendations that we've made to people is, if you have teams working from home, one of the most popular courses we've got at the moment it's called Remotely Humorous. It's how do you inject humor while you're on another Zoom meeting, and this is from two professors from Stanford University. So it's not somebody at the comedy store that's doing a bit of a gig online, as it were. Also courses on things like mindfulness, learning how to learn, understanding and working with resilience, and in a pressured environment. Because even though working from home for some is great, for others, and quite frankly, mainly women, there's also a house to run and family to look after as well. So for some people, it can be stressful. Now, I've worked with people in business who've said, I'm going to suggest 3 courses, and I'm going to take that course with my team. So we're going through this learning journey together. And that's just one way that when you're not interacting with people on a daily basis the way we used to, you are going through an experience together. And it's not about who gets the highest mark. It's just about learning something new that you can apply. And it gives you a common denominator in terms of having a conversation. I mean, I've been on so many Zoom meetings where you go around the room, how's everyone? And it turns out everyone's fine. And as opposed to if you create some new area that everyone can explore and talk about, it just creates a better level of cohesiveness. So we've got lots of people coming up in terms of our academic and industry partners with content ideas, and they don't all need to be degree level in terms of this is going to take you 2 years. We've got courses that people want to take which last 2 hours, and even that people only want a small part of it. But it's something that is there, and it has to be engaging, because we also realize that if you're going to spend time and effort, and I'm taking 2 courses myself at the moment. I don't need to, but I'm really interested in the topic areas. So, so some people view online learning as a bit like it's my disposable time. I could go watch another episode of something on TV, or I can spend 45 minutes and find out what's happening with cryptocurrencies in some part of the world. So it offers lots of opportunity for individuals as well as businesses. And in terms of what are people learning, that there are set areas that are very popular. So without a doubt, the biggest area people are learning about is all things to do with business, especially soft skills. So things like communication, influence, negotiations, these types of topic areas. Then it's all things technology, and it includes some of the areas that Chris has been talking about. Then data sciences, people are interested in the jobs that are going to get automated, and how do I try and future-proof myself by understanding data analytics. And then it's topics around healthcare, then engineering, then education. And education is how do I teach my kids while I have to homeschool? So there's a wide variety of content and a wide variety of people taking different levels of learning. And it's all at your own speed. That's the other thing as well. So some people prefer a bit of interaction in the morning, whereas others can only spare an hour on a Sunday afternoon.
Chris, just staying with the area of learning for a minute. There's clearly the board has a responsibility for cyber. That you've clearly set out. What's the position with learning about the risks, if that makes sense? In other words, how can the board make sure that it isn't seen as something that sits in the tech department, but is something that is actually the responsibility of everybody in terms of their behavior?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I guess there's two parts to that. I mean, if I look at my own managing partner, Kevin Ellis, he has really taken the time over the last 2 years to become really knowledgeable on cyber risk and how he intends to manage cyber risk in our firm. So leadership from the top is really important. It's changed massively over the last few years, particularly through supervisory boards and non-exec directors. This is a feature of every single boardroom conversation. Almost every organization now would have cyber risk as probably its number one risk. So in our most recent CEO survey, which we published 4 to 6 weeks ago, cyber risk in North America and Northwest Europe is now the number one risk concern for CEOs, ahead of the pandemic. So most companies now have this as probably their most important risk, and therefore any organization would expect the boardroom, the shareholders of that organization, we should expect the boardroom to become knowledgeable. And to Dil's point, there's lots and lots of opportunities for learning out there. There's lots of ways you can bring yourself up to speed on what cyber risk is, how you manage it. There's a huge amount of professional services support that you can buy in. There's a huge amount of technical support you can buy in. But nonetheless, the principle is the same, which is, as stakeholders in a business, the shareholders in a business should be and are expecting the boardrooms to become experts in this space. And they need to be experts because this is their number one risk, and is probably going to stay their number one risk for the future. On an individual level, then, there is, we have to recognise, particularly during the pandemic and post-pandemic, the amount of communication that organisations sent to their employees just went up, hugely over that period. So there's a huge amount of pressure on staff to, first of all, they're working from home. Secondly, the amount of communication being sent to them has gone through the roof. So the opportunity for hackers to exploit that through phishing attacks, and the way that they ordinarily execute is through phishing attacks. There's a really difficult balance for organisations to manage, because on one hand, arguably there's a mental health crisis. People are under a huge amount of pressure. The amount of communications they're getting, not just from their own organisation, but from lots of places, are increasing. The hackers are exploiting the COVID pandemic and the communications around the virus, around the vaccine, around healthcare, to exploit staff. So I think we have to be really planful, and we have to be really careful in the communication that we give staff and the education and awareness that we give them, and help them understand the role they can play in protecting and defending our organisations, but without adding to that stress. So that kind of cultural awareness piece it's a difficult line to walk at the moment, more so than ever. But we found in our own organisation, which is clearly a partnership, it does need to be led from the partners down. So your point around partnership behaviours and the behaviours of the people in the team have a huge impact on the way that risk is managed. And that would be no different to the journey that oil and gas companies went on with health and safety, for example, and the pervasive way that they managed to drive health and safety messages through their organisation. And it's a similar journey that we need to take our staff on with cyber. And I think oil and gas, with that health and safety, offers a really interesting blueprint where, they took it so seriously for a period of time to really change the game and change the dial in their organisation. So I suspect Dil might have some views on it, but it's a kind of learning journey, actually, that we need to realise is not it's a cultural shift. It's not going to happen overnight necessarily. It's something that we need to commit to long term, and it will need to bring in expertise from outside of the cybersecurity domain to really drive that understanding and awareness.
Thanks very much. Francesca, what's the thought you have before we ask Dil to talk a bit more about the change of culture? Are there any particular points that you can see coming out from Chris's focus on getting people engaged without at the same time stressing them out?
Yeah, there's a huge amount there around behaviours, and I think that mental health piece really plays through here, is that people have been using a variety of different methods to handle being stuck at home in a way that they weren't expecting. I wonder if there's a useful link here between cyber awareness and the learning experience, because as Chris rightly said, most of the cyber attacks are by phishing emails, those dreadful emails that you got many years ago, which were very unsophisticated and you immediately deleted. are replaced with things that look like they might be coming from your colleagues, are often incredibly well put together, very easy for someone to click on them, open up an attachment, and before you know, you've let the beast within. So there's a huge amount about people getting aware and being able to look around at the traffic that they get. Should you open it? Should you just delete it? Just a learning, getting each member of your organization up to speed on what they can do to protect the business that they're in, because just that awareness is incredibly helpful. We are going to see so much more of these attacks, and they'll get more and more sophisticated. So everybody getting up to speed is a really, really important part of being cyber secure.
Great. Dil, well, I'll ask your thoughts on that, if I may, and then I'll come back to Chris, because one of the areas we touched on earlier was this: should you pay the ransom? We've had a lot of problems with corrupt practices. Should you trade in certain countries? I sense this is going in the same direction. So once Dil's had some thoughts on learning, be really interested to hear your thoughts, Chris, on that whole area of should the board pay the money or not. Over to you, Dil.
Yeah, in terms of learning, I think anytime you create a sense of urgency, people pay much more attention to learning. I mean, what's happening with a lot of these attacks, and they almost feature weekly in the news in terms of some big organization that's been attacked. And the worst thing that can happen is it becomes background noise, and people just think, "Oh, I'm sure we've got IT people that can manage that." The other thing is, if ransomware is paid and nobody really knows what's happened, and some level of governance keeps things out of the press, then you've not really learned anything, and you're just hoping it doesn't happen again. I think anytime there is a breach, and I used to teach how to use influence and persuasion against phishing attacks. You need to discuss it at company level. You need to make everyone aware, not feel guilty about, oh, I shouldn't be on Amazon shopping during work hours on my company computer, but just making people aware of how clever. I mean, I created an email for people which looked like it came from the FBI, and people fell for it, even though the FBI has no jurisdiction in the UK. But people fell for it, and that's how easy these things can be. Now, you can educate, but the education and the learning has got to be beyond the annual, oh, here's your new computer, welcome new employee, now you've got to do your sort of like compliance and computer training, which is just a tick box exercise. I think it needs to be discussed, and I think, as Chris rightfully says, it needs to come from the top in terms of, here's the damage it can do to us as a company, but also it can potentially shut us down, which means you'll lose your job. So I just think the level of awareness and communicating that, whether it's through learning or ongoing comms, is going to be a big part of just making people aware that most people get into an organization through an email or some sort of a message that comes in. I mean, I've read about chief finance officers who think the CEO sent them an email message saying, "I'm in Australia and there's a problem. Send me $200,000." And they do it. And part of you thinks, how could you? The other part thinks, well, if they've got that kind of relationship, or maybe, you didn't want to be embarrassed or stand out or question authority. And I think all of these things need to be uncovered and, taken out of the shadows so people do feel comfortable talking about these things.
Right. Over to you, Chris, just to talk a bit about the ethics and should boards pay ransomware?
Sure. I mean, our position on this is always to get legal advice. Some actors, some threat actors, are on US sanction lists, so it's illegal to transact with them. So that's the kind of base starting point that we have with our clients. If you need to understand as best you can what's happened, which if you can try and get attribution to the attacker, and at the same time get legal advice, because, as I say, some threat actors are on US sanction lists. So now, of course, you need to balance that with some of the practical realities of, will I be in business after or not? That kind of US sanction piece aside, can we actually recover our business or not? If we can, and we've seen this quite often now, the way that you recover from a ransomware attack is not all that different from just recovering your IT systems normally. So if you've got good backups, I made that point earlier, if you've got good backups, then actually recovering your IT systems is not all that different. So there's a combination here of, get legal advice so you're really clear that you're not going to do something illegal. Understand what's happened and your ability to recover normally versus through paying the ransom, which in some circumstances aren't all that different. And that will give you a really good basis on which to make the decision. You also need, obviously, in many industries, to connect in with your regulator, and also with if you can, with the UK government through the NCSE, and they'll provide really good advice and guidance on how best to work through that problem.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Moving now perhaps to Francesca. Any final thoughts for today?
I think there's a lot to take away. There's on the cyber side of things, I think there's just thinking about it before it happens to you is clearly the strong message coming through. Have a proper plan. You might not be able to cover absolutely everything, but have you thought about insurance? Have you thought about your recovery plan? Have you thought about how you're going to manage things if it goes down? So being as pre-armed as you can be, and if you are attacked, great advice from Chris there. Get legal advice. Absolutely the first thing to do. Different jurisdictions have very different rules on this. So what's true in the UK might be completely wrong somewhere else. So huge important to get that. And then going back to the learning side of it, use that learning opportunity. It might be around cyber, it might be around a great skill. What a perfect opportunity for people to take advantage of learning about some of the many new and exciting areas that are taking place around the world. Why not take the opportunity to use online learning as a way of getting yourself more aware, more up to speed? And I love that thought of using it as a combined team learning experience too.
I'd like to thank Chris for sharing his insights, leading a team of 3,000 people, if I recall. So phenomenal contribution to the UK there. Thank you very much. Dil, for reminding us that it's actually a massive industry that if you're not tapping into, and you could with your team, then actually why don't you help people who aspire to management and leadership roles, and that isn't always the same as technical roles, to actually tap into that knowledge, because the likelihood is your training team internally won't be putting forward those particular courses. And Francesca, as always, thank you for managing to help stitch the whole thing together. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.